When the sun rose over New Avalon, the great city shimmered with light. Spires of silver glass reached into the sky, airships drifted between towers, and far below, the wide streets filled with people beginning their day. The Commonwealth had known peace for nearly 10 years now, and that peace had a name. It was Queen Leora. She was young compared to the long line of rulers before her, but she led with a calm strength that even her critics admired. People said her patience could soften metal, that she could stop a riot with a single look. Far from the royal palace, in the barracks that sat near the city's outer wall, a man named Ethan Cole finished his morning drill. He was a soldier through and through, tall and steady, with eyes that saw everything and judged little. The other soldiers joked that Ethan never bragged, never drank enough to boast, never spoke much about his past. They admired him but could not understand him. To them, he was a mystery wrapped in discipline. Ethan had fought many battles in his life. He was among those who marched when the outer colonies rebelled against the Commonwealth 10 years ago. The uprising had been fierce, and for a time, it looked as though the Queen's armies might fail. That was when Ethan made his choice to go farther than anyone ordered him to cross the fire, and smoke and pull the Queen herself from a collapsing dome where she was trapped after an explosion. He carried her half-conscious through the flames. His uniform burned, his skin seared, but he did not slow. When he returned her safely to her guards, he asked for no reward. Reporters and nobles praised him as a hero, but he only said, "I did my duty." That line spread faster than any royal speech. For a moment, the Queen herself said nothing. Some weeks later, she visited the hospital where he was healing, and for the first time, looked into the calm face of the man who had saved her life. That single meeting changed something in both of them. Years passed, the rebellion ended, the Commonwealth rebuilt. The Queen sat again on her shining throne, ruling fairly but with a trace of sadness that no one dared mention. Her council began to press her to remarry, to produce an heir. They spoke as though her heart were a machine that could simply be turned back on at command. But Leora felt no spark with any noble who came to court her. Their faces were handsome, their manners perfect, their words polished hand, yet none of them seemed real. One day she decided to leave the gilded chambers and visit the military academy outside the city. It was a rare thing for her to appear among common soldiers, and no one expected it. She walked the training grounds, her white uniform catching the sunlight. Soldiers stopped mid-drill and saluted. And there, at the far corner of the yard, stood Ethan Cole. They had not spoken since that day in the hospital. Years had hardened his frame, turned his hair a deeper shade of brown, and added more quiet to his eyes. When she stopped beside him, he gave her the same crisp bow as before. "Sir Ethan," she said softly, "you have not changed." "Duty does not change, Your Majesty," he answered. The Queen smiled for the first time in what felt like centuries. That smile was not the practiced curve she used for the court, but a warm, genuine spark. She asked about his service, about his men, about life beyond the palace walls. He spoke honestly and without fear, describing the worries of the soldiers, the small hopes of the people, and the pulse of a nation she loved but seldom touched. The counselors who stood nearby exchanged uneasy glances. They feared the quiet ease between monarch and soldier. They knew words could spread faster than rumors of war. Yet the Queen did not care. In Ethan's voice, she heard something rare truth spoken without gain, care without ambition. When the visit ended, she found herself thinking of him long after she should have dismissed the moment. Over the next months, she called for his reports more often than necessary. Some said she trusted his honesty. Others began to whisper more dangerous guesses. Ethan never sought attention. If anything, he wished to fade back into his simple life, but the Queen seemed drawn to his company. Conversations that began with official matters turned softly into talks about the past, about duty, about loneliness. She told him how the weight of the crown sometimes felt heavier than armor. He told her that even soldiers felt the same weight when they carried the lives of others in their hands. And though no promise passed between them, an unspoken bond grew. Fragile but certain a bond that would soon shake the foundations of the crown itself. The days after the Queen's visit to the military academy were different for Ethan. Life still followed its steady rhythm of patrols, guard duty, and reports. Yet there was a quiet change in his heart. he could not name. He did not seek to see the queen again, but her image entered his thoughts when he least expected it. He would recall her calm voice, her gentle laughter, the way she had listened to him, as though every word mattered. In the palace, Queen Leora felt something similar. Her thoughts often returned to the soldier whose words had the weight of honesty.
Oh, nice.
Among the shining halls filled with flatterers and clever courtiers, his humility reminded her of what her crown truly meant. She had built peace through careful laws and treaties. Yet she had rarely known anyone who spoke to her like a person and not like a symbol. Her council did not understand her silence or her certainty. They brought princes and noblemen from across the Commonwealth, men who smiled too much and bowed too low. They each spoke of unity, alliance, and future heirs, but none spoke of kindness or sacrifice. When the queen looked at them, she saw ambition, dressed in silk and smiles. When she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan standing tall and steady among his men, a man who sought no reward. One afternoon, the queen sent a message to the commander of the royal guard. Ethan had been assigned to lead a team protecting the outer gates, but her letter changed that. By command of the crown, he was transferred to the royal palace as captain of the inner guard. The order gave him no choice, although he hoped the queen had other reasons than mere duty. His first day at the palace felt strangely heavy. He arrived at sunrise, his boots echoing across marble floors as servants bowed and courtiers stared. He was out of place among them, a soldier among silks. Yet the queen's calm made it easier. When she passed him in the corridors or entered the hall, he felt an ease that no protocol could teach. The first weeks were quiet. Ethan oversaw training, inspected patrols, and secured new walls for the queen's protection. But slowly, their paths began to cross. Sometimes she asked him to report personally about security matters. Other times, she called for him simply to talk. Their meetings stretched beyond duty. They spoke of the old wars, of how peace was built, of how fragile it still was. She told him how her family line had suffered from an old sickness that made it hard to bear heirs. The royal line grew thin with each generation, and her council watched her closely, hoping for news of a child who would secure the throne. She shared these worries not as a ruler, but as a woman who felt the world's weight pressing on her heart. Ethan listened quietly, his face steady, but his mind filled with care. He did not pity her, and she liked that. Pity, she said once, was the poison of kings. What she sought was trust. One evening, a sudden storm broke over the capital. The heavy wind struck the palace towers, lightning flashed through the glass windows, and the sound of thunder rolled across the sky. The queen was in the upper chamber reading reports when a bolt struck a nearby spire, making the walls tremble. Guards rushed through the corridors, and Ethan came running to check her safety. He found her standing near the window, her crown on the table beside her, her face pale but calm. He stepped forward. "Your Majesty, it is not safe here." The queen turned toward him, rain glowing against the glass behind her. No place is safe when lightning chooses its target. He wanted to insist she follow him to the shelter, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was something fragile, yet powerful, in that small smile. She whispered, "Do you think courage always belongs to soldiers?" He answered softly, "No, Your Majesty. Sometimes it belongs to those who refuse to hide behind armor." Her eyes met his, and the air between them felt charged like the storm outside. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence, and the queen drew a long breath. When the storm finally passed, she walked with him through the quiet halls. The light from the lamps reflected on the polished floors, and in that stillness, she spoke again. "You remind me that the crown is not made of gold," she said. "It is made of duty, of people we must protect, even from our own pride." Ethan bowed, his heart uneasy. "Your Majesty, you lead by strength we can only hope to match." She smiled faintly. "You speak as though you are not a symbol of strength yourself." From that night onward, strange calm settled over the palace. The queen appeared lighter in spirit. Her laughter returned, brief but genuine. Ethan guarded her door each day, sometimes seeing her through the open chamber as she worked late into the night. And though neither spoke of what had passed, they both knew that something had changed, that the world beyond those marble walls would one day force them to face the truth of what they felt. Months went by after the night of the storm, and the palace grew used to the quiet friendship between the queen and her captain of the guard. Courtiers still whispered, as courtiers always do, but Leora paid no attention. She saw in Ethan a steady comfort, a man who stood near her not because of power or favor, but because he believed in her cause. He protected her from threats that no one spoke of aloud, and he asked for nothing in return. One early morning, when the city was just beginning to wake, Ethan was called to the queen's study. The chamber was filled with light from tall glass windows. The queen stood by the desk, a letter in her hand. Her face looked calm, yet there was worry in her eyes. "Captain," she began, "there is trouble again in the northern colonies. The council fears unrest." Ethan nodded. "Do you wish for me to prepare the guard?" She walked to the window and looked out over the city. "No, the council insists I send an envoy to meet the leaders there. They want me to stay safe here in New Avalon, but I believe the people must see that their queen is not afraid to walk among them." Ethan's voice sharpened slightly. "It may be dangerous, Your Majesty." She turned to face him. "That is why I want you to come." The journey north was long and cold. The queen traveled in a small convoy of airships while Ethan rode beside her as chief of security. It was rare for the ruler of the whole Commonwealth to travel so far without armies behind her, but Leora wanted to show the people she trusted them. In every town they passed, citizens came out to see the queen, who ruled not from fear but from heart. Ethan saw how they bowed and cheered for her. Children ran beside the road waving flags. Old soldiers saluted. The queen smiled at them, spoke kindly to the farmers and merchants, and asked about their lives. To her, they were not just subjects. They were the reason she ruled. In the northern capital, the queen met the local leaders in a great hall made of stone and glass. The talks were tense at first, but her patience won them over. By the third day, peace was restored through words rather than weapons. Ethan felt proud as he watched her speak. It reminded him why he had followed her all these years. But not everyone was pleased. The same evening after the talks ended, one of the servants tried to slip poison into the queen's drink. Ethan saw the strange movement and acted fast. He dashed forward, knocking the cup from her hand just as the servant raised it. Guards seized the traitor before he could flee. The queen looked at Ethan, stunned but thankful. Later, when they were alone, she said, "You have saved me again." He answered quietly, "It is my duty, Your Majesty." She shook her head. "No, Ethan, you do this not only because of duty." He said nothing, but the silence between them spoke more than words could. She looked at him as if she wanted to say something more, yet held back. The world outside their small space was full of tradition, rules, and the heavy weight of the crown. When they returned to New Avalon, rumors of the attempt spread through the court like fire and dry grass. The nobles praised Ethan in public, but whispered behind closed doors that he had grown too close to the throne. Some even feared he might gain the queen's heart, which could upset the noble families who guarded their power carefully. Leora noticed the growing tension at court, yet she refused to banish him. Instead, she honored his service with quiet dignity, promoting him as her chief advisor for matters of security. It allowed them to meet often and gave others no reason to question his presence. Weeks turned into months. The queen often worked late at night, reading reports or writing letters under soft light. Ethan would be nearby, silent but alert, standing near the doors as she worked. Sometimes she would pause to talk to him about anything from the gardens outside her window to her memories of the sea near her childhood home. Their conversations became softer, filled with trust, and something more that neither dared name. One evening, as she closed her book, she said, "Ethan, have you ever wondered what it means to live for something beyond duty?" He looked at her with calm eyes. "I think I have begun to learn, Your Majesty." Her hand rested on the window frame, the moonlight falling across her face. "Then perhaps we are both learning the same thing." Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. Inside, two souls who had once met through fire and danger found in each other a peace they had not known before. Neither spoke the truth that filled the space between them, but both felt it growing, deep and certain, like roots beneath stone. That night would mark the beginning of a secret that would change not only their lives but the future of the crown itself. The months that followed brought quiet joy to the palace. The queen appeared happier than she had in many years. The heavy sadness that once lingered in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a calm that no one could explain. Only Ethan understood why. Behind the walls of gold and marble, away from the eyes of rulers and nobles, a love had quietly taken root between a queen and her guard. They never spoke of it in words, yet every look, every moment shared, told their secret. Leora often met him in the royal gardens at night, when the moonlight fell softly on the flowers. They walked slowly, speaking of life, of peace, of dreams, never daring to speak directly of what bound their hearts together. Their love was both a blessing and a danger. The Queen's council grew uneasy. They noticed her glances toward Ethan, her small smiles when he entered the hall. Whispers began to move through the court like a cold wind in winter. The nobles feared that if she bore a child without a proper royal marriage, the crown would face a scandal that could tear the Commonwealth apart. One morning, the senior counselor, Lord Grant, came before the Queen with a heavy face. "Your Majesty," he said, "the people await word of an heir. The other houses grow restless. They wish for assurance that the royal line will continue." Leora looked away for a moment. "I will give them peace of mind soon," she replied, her voice calm but distant. Grant bowed, but there was sharp suspicion in his eyes. He left the chamber with a look that told her he did not believe her words. That night, the Queen stood by her mirror, her hand pressed over her heart. She knew what she could not tell the world yet. She was carrying a secret that would change everything. When she told Ethan the news, his face went pale first, then softened with both wonder and fear. "A child," he whispered. "Yes," she said quietly, "our child." For a long moment, neither spoke. "Oh." The soft sound of rain touched the windows like distant music. Finally, Ethan said, "The world will not forgive this easily." She met his eyes. "Then we will give the world something it cannot deny. It's a child of truth, not of power." Ethan wanted to speak again, but no words would come. He bowed his head and whispered, "Then we will face it together." Months passed. Rumors began to circle through the palace like shadows. Some said the Queen had fallen sick. Others told wild tales of betrayal. The council pressed her daily to announce a formal marriage, but she refused to choose anyone. She told them that the crown did not need to marry for politics, but for love. Her words confused them and angered the noble families who had long sought to gain power through the throne. Finally, one spring morning, the bells of New Avalon rang through the city. The palace servants ran through the halls, spreading the news. A royal child had been born. A prince named Adrian. The people celebrated, the towers lit up, and songs filled the air. But within the palace walls, questions burned darker than any fire. Who was the father? No one knew. The Queen named her newborn son Adrian, meaning brave one, and held him close. The child's eyes were bright and clear, filled with quiet strength, even as a baby. Ethan stood far in the shadows, allowed only to watch from the side. His chest ached with pride, love, and pain, all at once. He wanted to hold his son, to call him his own, yet he knew the truth had to remain silent for now. As the weeks passed, the hallways of the palace filled with whispers louder than ever. Some nobles demanded the Queen name the father. Others urged her to marry at once to silence the talk. But Leora stayed strong. "No," she said to her council. "The boy is mine. He is of royal blood. It is all anyone needs to know." Ethan continued his duty as captain of the guard, watching over both mother and child. Sometimes late at night, when the palace was quiet, he would stand outside the royal nursery door and listen to the sound of the baby laughing. It filled him with joy he could not show. One evening, the Queen approached him there. She looked tired but peaceful. "He will grow up strong," she said softly. "And when the time comes, he will know the truth." Ethan nodded slowly. He should be raised to serve his people, not to feel ashamed of how he came to be. She smiled faintly. Then he will have learned from the best example, beyond the palace walls. Celebration still echoed, but within those quiet rooms, there was knowledge heavier than any crown. The Queen and her guard had changed the course of the kingdom forever, though only they and the newborn child knew how deep that truth ran. Neither the Queen nor Ethan spoke of the future that night. They simply stood beside each other, the sound of the sleeping child. Between them both understanding that their hearts now belonged not just to each other, but to the life they had brought into a world that might never forgive them for it. The years went by, and the castle grew quieter as young Prince Adrian began to walk and talk. He was bright, strong, and kind, with eyes that watched and understood much more than a normal child. The Queen loved him deeply, giving him all the warmth she could spare. The people of the Commonwealth adored him too. They called him the hope of the new age, a child who brought peace and light everywhere he smiled. Ethan remained close, always in his post as captain of the guard. He saw the boy every day, but only from a distance. He watched Adrian grow, saw him take his first steps in the royal garden, fall, and pick himself up without tears, and laughed quietly to himself when the child waved at him from the balcony. Sometimes when Leora saw Ethan watching, their eyes would meet for a brief moment. That small connection was enough to remind them of what bound them together. Adrian grew into a boy of 10, clever beyond his years. He often slipped away from his tutors to wander into the training grounds where the guards practiced. The first time Ethan found him there, Adrian stood beside the soldiers, his hands folded behind his back, mimicking their stance. When Ethan called out softly, "Your Highness, it is not safe here," the boy turned with a grin and said, "But I want to see how brave men serve." Ethan smiled. Bravery, young prince, is not about fighting. It is about understanding when to protect and when to forgive. The boy tilted his head. "That sounds like something my mother would say." Ethan chuckled softly. "Then you already have the best teacher, Your Highness." From that day onward, Adrian often came to the practice yard to watch Ethan train his men. The guards grew fond of the curious boy who asked countless questions about honor, courage, and duty. None of them knew the bond that already linked the two so deeply. One morning, the Queen announced that there would be a grand ceremony to celebrate the 10th birthday of her son. The entire palace began to prepare. Nobles from every province were invited. Flags fluttered over the city, and bells rang across New Avalon. The Queen ordered that the celebration be open to all citizens, for Adrian belonged not just to the royal family, but to the whole nation. The grand hall was filled with music and light. Long tables were set with silver plates and golden cups. Dancers performed, poets recited verses, and laughter echoed through the shining palace. Ethan stood at his place with his guards, his eyes never leaving the Queen or the prince. When the Queen entered with Adrian, the crowd rose to their feet, cheering and calling out blessings. The boy looked proud but also thoughtful. He gave short, polite bows, just as his tutors had taught him, but his eyes often wandered to where Ethan stood. After speeches from nobles and foreign guests, it was Adrian's turn to speak. He stepped up to the dais, his small hands gripping the edge of the stand. His voice, though young, carried clearly through the great hall. He spoke with gratitude for his mother and the people who served the Commonwealth. He thanked the teachers and soldiers who guarded their peace. Then, as he turned to look around the hall, his gaze landed on Ethan. Something awakened in his memory, perhaps a whisper from his mother, perhaps a feeling he could not name. In that moment, a truth that had lived quietly in the shadows came alive. The boy smiled and pointed toward the guard line. "And I must thank the bravest man I know," he said. "My father." The hall fell silent at once. Every whisper stopped. Goblets froze midway to lips. The Queen did not move, her face pale as snow, but her eyes brimmed with tears. Ethan stood like a statue, his mind stunned, his heart pounding in his chest. No one dared to speak. Even the nobles who lived for gossip found no words. At last, Adrian turned to his mother with a soft, innocent smile. "Is that not true, Mother?" he asked simply. She looked at him, at Ethan, and at the sea of faces waiting for her reaction. Then, slowly, she rose from her throne. Voice rang steady and clear across the hall. "My son speaks truth," she said. "This man, Sir Ethan Cole, saved my life, served my people, and stands as the finest of them all. The crown may rest upon my head, but the courage that built this peace lives in him. If my son calls him father, then he speaks from the heart of justice itself." The silence broke into an echoing wave of sound. Some gasped, others bowed their heads. A few nobles looked ready to faint, while the common guards clenched their fists in pride. For a moment, Ethan feared the crown would collapse under such truth, but then something unexpected happened. The people began to clap, louder and louder, until the hall shook with approval. The Queen turned toward Ethan. "Walk beside your son," she said softly. "The world must see what honor truly looks like." Ethan stepped forward, every stride echoing through the hall. He stood beside the young prince, who reached for his hand, and for the first time, Ethan did not hide the love in his eyes. That day became a turning point in the kingdom's history. The moment when truth triumphed over fear, when a boy's innocent voice united a people more deeply than any crown or title ever could. And from that silence in the great hall, a new era began, an era built on courage, honesty, and love that no rule or bloodline could ever break.